Hello and welcome back to El Partido. You thought you could get away from us? Not a chance. It's Nick Bell here. We've got a very special bonus episode to end the season on, and I'm delighted to have this guest with us. He's an absolute expert in this field, and as the World Cup is it just about to kick off or just has kicked off, I thought what better time to speak to this man from the other side of the world, no less, as well. So there's been some real effort into that, and we'll certainly get onto that in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce you to Martin da Cruz, author of Uruguay, Football's First Global Power. How are you, Martin? You okay?
Hey Nick, yeah, good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no
Yeah,
problem at
excited
all.
to get into it.
Definitely. So just for the listener at home, obviously I've also alluded to the fact that we are working against time zones here. You're based in Australia, aren't you? We were discussing this beforehand in Melbourne. Is that where you're sort of from originally with a heritage of Uruguay, or is it a love of Uruguay? What's the story here, if you don't mind me asking?
No. So yeah, I was born here in Melbourne, born and raised. My parents are from South America. So mum's side is Uruguayan, and dad's side, funny enough, is from Argentina.
Oh,
So they met in Australia. They migrated here both in the 70s. They met, married, etc. And here I am. But yeah, just raised by my mother's side only. So I really kind of had that Uruguayan connection and that kind of affinity, that real connection to Uruguay.
yeah, it's a big embrace, isn't it, that you can get from those family connections. You wouldn't be able to tell from my accent, Martin, but I'm actually a Scotland fan, and I love my sort of like Scottish roots and things like that. So yours is a bit
That's
more
beautiful.
extreme.
I'm a Scotland fan as well, as we'll probably get into. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, that's always good to hear. We're off to a cracking start already, which is brilliant. So, obviously, you've got this family connection, this heritage back to Uruguay. Uruguay itself is such an interesting place in terms of the size of the country, the I'm going to use a term the kids use nowadays, the clout that it has in terms of not just as a footballing power, but as a sort of economic and influential power in South America as well. You're a bit of an expert on Latin American affairs and history and things like that as well, aren't you? So I would like to sort of like first ask, when it comes to covering the country of Uruguay in book form, what was the pull to go all the way back to the beginning? Because this you have your first book, don't you, which sort of like covers it. I think it was 1888 onwards um, up until the start of the second book, isn't it? So what was the pull for going all the way back? Are you starting at the beginning and hoping to tell the full story?
yeah, that's pretty much it. So my first book, From Beauty to Duty, that starts in 1878, where we have the first kind of recorded football match. It's right there at the start of the book. But when you read through, it's by a newspaper called El Siglo, big conservative paper at the time, and they covered this game played at the Montevideo Cricket Club by the British community there. It was more a game of rugby than it was football, if you can kind of tell by that you can tell that from the chronicle there. But yeah, so my background, so I got into football, obviously from my family, from my grandfather, from that side, that connection to Uruguay, and growing up, as a kid in Melbourne with, the child of immigrants, this is the kind of something I was really proud of, and a way to kind of connect with people through sport. So I always wanted to talk about Uruguay, wanted to learn more, but it wasn't till I started out at university. So I did history at uni, and that's where I got into kind of Latin American history, and I had a couple of influential teachers there that kind of showed how you can use popular culture to kind of to look at Latin American history and the kind of creation of national identity and the history, like political, economic, cultural history of nations, and what, how societies are kind of born. So that kind of, made me want to kind of dig deeper into, how Uruguay kind of formed as a modern nation. And football just kind of came into it, and I got into the history writing, and I got into a PhD program as well, where I was looking at football and how it was introduced, and how it popularized. So that was the thing, kind of looking back, like once you get more into reading about football history in Latin America and the wider world, there was kind of this, in the English language, there was this big gap, especially in Uruguayan football. It's kind of, a chapter here, a chapter there. You look at a World Cup history, it's obviously, they cover the first World Cup and a little bit of the Olympics, but there's nothing really in depth. There has been, but nothing that kind of uses the voices of the time. So like I was kind of really into kind of archival stuff and getting, digging deep into the newspapers of the time. Like I really wanted to kind of gauge the kind of mentality. Yeah, get the feeling of the people, like how they saw the game, like what they thought of it, like how how it evolved in their minds as well, as on the pitch. So that's what I kind of looked to do. Like, I mean, I dropped out of the PhD program, and because of COVID and things like that, I needed to direct my life in to other ways. But I decided to write that first book, and that was the kind of thing. I just wanted to kind of reconstruct Uruguayan history and give a kind of English language account of how it was introduced, how it was born, how locals kind of adopted it, and how they made it their own kind of game. And I think it's just like a nice, it's an easy way to kind of follow history. I think this kind of chronological kind of narrative history. So I really like taking people on that journey of the adoption and just seeing how it evolved and how it kind of linked with different processes as well in the country, political kind of economic currents that kind of, themes that are universal in football history.
I think it's very interesting as well that you speak about this opportunity to showcase Uruguayan football and its history, which it has got a very fascinating history as well, which I'm sure we'll get into shortly. But in an English language format. And I found this in a similar interview I had with a chap called David Arrowsmith, who, similar to yourself, is the son of immigrants. His mother is Colombian. So he does a lot of focus on sort of like Colombian football. And I think from the English-speaking world, you're absolutely correct. We've heard the stories of Brazilian football. We've heard the stories of Argentinian football, Maradona, etc., etc. But South America is such a big continent filled with these footballing nations that have all got their own unique stories. I was watching Scotland against Bolivia last night, for example, and fantastic result for Scotland. But Bolivia aren't a team that are slouchy. They've got one of the best home records on the South American continent, for example. And to the English person or the British person or anyone outside of that sphere, you'd go, well, why is that? And then it's only when you learn that they play at something, that they're closer to space than they are to sea level, that you realise that there's probably a reason why teams like Brazil struggle when they get to La Paz. So I think it is a great opportunity to tell these stories. And your new book especially, which I thank you so much for sending over an advanced copy for me. I'm really enjoying making my way through it and find about all this history here. Where I want to kind of pick it up then is at the beginning of that book, because we're in 1917, aren't we, when we're sort of starting? And obviously the world is at war at that point. It's a world war, obviously mainly focused in Europe, but the after effect is felt throughout empires and influences in regions as well. I believe there is a story about Uruguay kind of getting a bit of a ricochet in the World War as well, in terms of having to declare war on. I think it was Germany that they declared war on at one point as well. So where this book starts is obviously in a time of a dark space for the world, but it grows into one of the most fascinating sort of just over a decades for a country that is as you say, emerging into a global football powerhouse.
Hmm. Yeah, so yeah, the book picks up from Beauty to Judy, so around the end of 1917. So yeah, the First World War is in full effect. Uruguay had just um, entered the kind of Allied camp, like they would usually neutral throughout, just like in World War Two. So at the end of 1917, start of 1918, Uruguay, uh, they're a real regional kind of leader, regional power in both football terms and cultural, political, economically as well.
Hmm.
While the war is happening in Europe, Latin America, South America, Uruguay, Argentina, they were kind of relatively, I wouldn't say untouched by the war. Obviously, you had the kind of the effects of populations like there were kind of groups from Italy as well, like Italian immigrants that went to fight in the war, and it was involved. But
Yeah.
Uruguay kind of came out. They came out very prosperous during World War One. So due to their kind of export economy, it's a meat and wool country, so they got rich pretty quickly during the war years. So economically, they were very prosperous. And they were very politically progressive as well. Uruguay was seen as a real kind of enlightened country
Mm.
as well. They had these kind of progressive social reforms that were ushered in by a really influential president, Jose Bache y Ordóñez. So in the early 20th century, he's a real radical reformist president who helped enact kind of real labor reforms, the 8-hour workday, pensions, maternity leave, and other kind of they call it moral legislation, like divorce
Mm.
laws in before 1910, recognizing the rights of illegitimate children.
Yeah.
So Uruguay was kind of seen as this real kind of beacon, or like they were at the vanguard of what they described as quote unquote civilization.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was kind of their thing was to be, and this goes back to the size of the country. So Uruguay was such a tiny country, wedged between Argentina and Brazil. These really kind of domineering, like overbearing kind of nations. So from independence, Uruguay was they had this kind of anxiety about their country. They were kind of constantly threatened, um, you know,
Mm.
reality, but also kind of mentally as well. So these advanced laws and kind of being what Bache called, becoming a kind of small model country. That was a way of the people to kind of survive as a nation.
Mm.
So that kind of was almost at its peak, economically and culturally, and this reflected in the football as well. So in 1917, Uruguay was a South American power. So they had just won their second Campeonato Sudamericano, today's Copa America.
Hmm.
So they hosted that in 1917, the year before the inaugural tournament in Buenos Aires. They won that as well. So yeah, that was the kind of culmination of 1917 to 18, where my new book starts. That was kind of one era. That was kind of the first era of Uruguayan football. Its kind of adoption, its nationalization, how it became a national sport, really tied closely to national identity in the country as well. And through these kind of these successes as well on the pitch. So that's kind of where we left off. Uruguay was entering the 1920s, their centenary celebrations as well. So it was this real kind of like drive for um, national celebration and kind of
Mm.
identity, and to kind of both project who they are to the rest of the world, but also kind of to tell themselves these stories as well, in terms of like forging a kind of sense of pride and belonging. And football was something that really kind of was a vehicle for this this optimistic country, this kind of optimistic
Mm.
outlook. And yeah, that's kind of where we start.
Yeah, because like you say, we talk a lot about sort of like golden eras and golden generations, don't we? And it's fair to say. So I've seen this a lot in the last couple of weeks. Sort of like the clickbait nature of, oh, why do Uruguay have 4 stars above their badge tag when they've only won 2 World Cups? And we know why. It's just a way to engage in it. But the 1920s were this really, really like we do say, a golden era for Uruguayan football. No matter where they went, they turned it into success, didn't they? And I think, when they come over to Europe for the Olympics, it is a opportunity for them to debut on this world stage. As you've already mentioned, they are very comfortable at beating their neighbours at home. They are a powerhouse in South America, which we could even say is still the case to this day. But at that time, when they're going to go to Europe, you have got these emerging football powers there as well. Particularly England and French football starting to get up ahead of speed. The Italian football's not too far behind either. So it's an opportunity for them to go there and see how it is going to affect them. And considering that the game started in Europe, and considering that, like you say, the first game was between visiting British merchants and things like that in Uruguay, the style of football that Uruguay came to Europe with was so far beyond the capability of what Europeans were up to at that point, wasn't it? It must have blown their mind to see them in Paris.
Yeah, it really did. Like, it started in the when they first landed in Europe. So Uruguay were the first South American team to play on European soil. So the Spanish in Vigo, they were the ones that got the first look at La Celeste, and they were just kind of just in shock at this style of game, and it continued in Paris as well. They really struck the local crowds and the newspapers as well. They're like, this is a game that we haven't seen before. Well, we have seen it before, but not kind of on a so-called amateur level. Like, the Uruguayans were getting compared to the English professionals in how they play.
I like, sorry to interrupt, I like how you mentioned Vigo there as well, because there's a word you just mentioned that really itches my mind. So obviously, Vigo have Celta Vigo as their team. They play in a similar colour to obviously what the Uruguayan national team play in, but also their cantera is called Celeste Cantera or Cantera Celeste. Is there a connection there? That am I making that connection, or am I overthinking that? Is that something that stemmed from Uruguay being the first team to play in Europe in Vigo?
You might be inventing that. I have no idea. We'll actually have
It'd
to
be
look that
cool if
up.
we
That's
found that
pretty cool.
out, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's pretty cool. Yeah, it is. Yeah, because I don't remember when reading about reading the articles at the time talking about Celta's their kits or anything like that. And obviously Uruguay were playing in Celeste as well, so that might have left a mark on them. So yeah, when they got to Spain. The Vigo crowds, or there was one newspaper that says, on the fields of Coya passed a ráfaga olímpica, so like an Olympic burst, an Olympic gust, blast, whatever kind of translation you want to use. So it really, this kind of style of football, this kind of short passing, this really kind of quick movement, quick passing combination kind of game, kind of improvised dribbling, all that kind of stuff that defines River Plate football, or South American football as a whole now. That really kind of shocked crowds. But it wasn't the first kind of taste that Europeans had of Uruguayan football. So a couple of years earlier, so the story of the Olympic kind of generation really starts a couple of years earlier. So like, if we can go back to that. So in 1922, we have Uruguayan football had completely split. So you've got the two big sides, you've got Nacional and you've got Peñarol. So Nacional were kind of, at the time, this is all an effect of the Argentine schism. So there was a rupture in Argentine football since 1919. It was their second one. So Uruguay always had this kind of, let's say, when Argentina, gets sick, Uruguay catches a cold, or when they sneeze, something like that. Anyway, so there was this kind of, yeah, it was a real political, diplomatic kind of tensions throughout these years, and it all came to a head in 1922 when Peñarol, they kind of requested to play an unaffiliated, so an amateur, they were called the amateurs in Argentina, an unaffiliated side. Um, and they were told by the association, who was backed by Nacional, they were the kind of the flag bearers of legalism, and we have to play by the rules, and where if playing unaffiliated rules, kind of unaffiliated teams, goes against FIFA statutes. So they warned them. Peñarol played. Peñarol got kicked out. Peñarol formed a new dissident governing body, so the federation. So it was this kind of split, this kind of power struggle that you have in Uruguayan football, and the fight for legitimacy, which led the association, backed by Nacional and also some very important political figures, to seek FIFA affiliation in 1923. So that kind of so that brought Uruguayan diplomat Enrique Buero. So he was kind of given instructions to find this to seek FIFA affiliation. So he went to Geneva, the FIFA Congress in Geneva in 1923, and when he was there meeting with people, he kind of thought of. He wrote back to Uruguay, and he was like, I see there's an opportunity here. We could play some games in Spain, and we could also participate in the Olympics. So this kind of thing really happened quickly, like the opportunity to play in the Olympics kind of presented an opportunity, a sporting opportunity, but also a kind of cultural, political, diplomatic kind of opportunity as well.
Did that unify back the two clubs? Did we obviously we've seen Peñarol return to the fold nowadays as one of the country's most successful clubs, but did that heal the rift and division back then, or was that still quite a gaping scar at the time?
No, we see that after Paris. So the year after Paris, Uruguay or Uruguayan football reunifies. But yeah, so in that 1923, after FIFA affiliation has been granted, Uruguay hosts the 1923 Copa America, Campeonato Sudamericano. So Uruguayan football split. So you only have the association side, which kind of diluted the talent pool, or at least the kind of selection, who was eligible for selection. So Atilio Narancio, so he was the association president. He was a national selector, and he picked this really young team. So in 1923, we have these this kind of young blood, these fresh new players that come in. So you'll see them at the Olympics the following year. So players like Jose Nasazzi, the central defender. We have Pedro Petrone, the centre forward, and we have Jose Leandro Andrade, the one who would be called the Black Marvel the next year. So these guys are given a promise by Narancio. They said that he told them, gathered them before the tournament, and he said, win this, and you're going to Europe. And of course, they won it. And a few months later, they set sail, and they arrived in Europe, and that was pretty much it. They went, and the Spanish tour happened, beat everyone, 9 games, won all of them, and then Paris happened.
Yeah, it's quite a revelation in Europe, isn't it? Like they took it by storm, and it's important to remember as well that at this point, Spanish football's not necessarily in its infancy, but it's not as organised as say what Uruguay is or other nations are. So, when Uruguay get to the Olympics, they really are coming up against sort of like the creme de la creme, if you pardon the pun, when they get there, and from being a virtually unknown, they completely stun, sort of the football world, don't they, here? Just some of the results, 5 matches, scoring 20 goals, conceding just twice in this tournament as well. And not, by slouchy scorelines. Yugoslavia beating, 7-0. They beat France 5-1. They basically took the whole thing by storm, didn't it? And I don't think European audiences really knew what to make of Uruguay. Like, it was like watching some kind of futuristic football, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. Like no one, like I mean, news had reached Paris about this, South American team that were in Spain and smashing everyone, and there'd been, the Spanish papers were very clear. They were saying these are the favorites for the tournament.
Mm.
Like, don't sleep on these guys. These guys are, they're gonna, look out. But there was still this kind of element of like, maybe it's that European kind of, um, not belittling, like kind of looking down on
Yeah,
South American teams. There's kind of underestimation. So
yeah,
like,
a bit of arrogance, isn't it? Sometimes I
yeah,
think because
bit of
I
arrogance.
still think there's still at this point probably the empirical hangover, isn't there? Especially in some countries like Spain, France, and Britain, and such. But
Oh, 100%. I mean, not even a hangover. Like these are empires that are still like, almost at the peak
mm,
of their powers as well. So this kind of imperial worldview, looking at, a South American country was that's what they called it as well. Like when a couple of years earlier there were articles about this is what kind of sparked Uruguay's the idea to affiliate with FIFA and to go to the Olympics were some kind of just random little news sources that Argentina or South American countries were looking to compete in the Olympics. So this happened maybe late, I think it was early 1923, so the year before. There were kind of news reports on that, and a Uruguayan paper quoted a French newspaper who was saying, oh, we're gonna see the savages play football or some savage football, things like that.
mm.
So you had this kind of this element of not disrespect, but they underestimated them, and that was kind of reflected in the first match against Yugoslavia. Only a couple thousand people were
Mm.
there. Um,
And that grew into, like say, by the time you reach the final of the tournament, that completely changes, and it becomes this spectacle more than anything, and that was a thing of the time, wasn't it? This is well before the era of mass entertainment that we see now. So if something was happening of note, the masses would turn up, and when they win the Olympics in Paris, it is I think by the end it's not a shock. I think like it's by the end people going fair cop, this they are the best team in the world, and that's why they get the first star on the badge that they have above that, because obviously this predates any kind of World Cup. Um, Again, the second one is the other Olympics, isn't it? Again, taking it's it's happening on European soil again. Is I think it's Amsterdam, if I remember rightly,
yep.
in 1928. And they asked the question, can lightning strike twice? Have the Europeans learned their lesson here? What's happened in the interim in Uruguay as well? You alluded before that there was a reunification of the associations and the federation. Does that make Uruguay more dangerous going into the second Olympics, or does that make them more expected? I suppose is the question I'm going to ask.
Yeah, I think the expectation was high. It was, and you read it all in the papers. It's like we're going to Amsterdam to defend our world title, because as you said before, that's when Uruguay got their first star. So the Olympic football tournament, which happened before, it happened before the kind of Olympic tournament proper.
Mm,
That was the world championship of the game as well. And the 1924 Olympics were that was probably because we have this debate about the stars or whatever. Some people
I,
have their issues with that, but
I think they count. I think it's fine.
I mean, yeah, they obviously count. I mean, that was the kind of first real world tournament. You had
Mm,
participants from multiple, more than two continents, or was it three, or it was four continents in 1924. It was actually an open championship as well, so like anyone could. We have this idea that it was an amateur only tournament, the football tournament, because it was within it was in the Olympics, but this was
mm,
within FIFA rules. And there's a Uruguayan French historian called Pierre Arrighi, who's written lots of books on Uruguay's stars and how this kind of these 1920s titles should be really defended and respected as well by the world. And these were open tournaments, so these professionals or amateurs could perform alike. So these were open tournaments. They were international, so they were world and they were FIFA recognized as well. But anyway, just wanted to make that point.
Make sure that's in there. It's only the same as teams who have won the European trophy, and have the stars on now, even though it's the Champions League things. It's the same sort of equivalent, really, isn't it? It's the tournament of the time. You've got to be in it to win it, and if you do win it, you need to celebrate it. And Uruguay just don't win these. They dominate them, and they retain their title in Amsterdam. Winning that second consecutive Olympic gold. 17 teams in this one. I know the British associations left this one, so there was no England, Scotland, or Northern Ireland in this one. Argentina, the runners-up as well. So again, you're starting to see this paradigm of a rivalry in South American football as well start to be played on European soil too, which I think is, again, you see that to this very day. And then Italy in third in this tournament as well. So again, the Europeans are really pushed to sort of like the back of the queue here, aren't they, in terms of how dominant South American football is in the world at this moment?
Yeah, so Amsterdam was huge. So you have the inclusion of, so joining Uruguay was Chile. So Chile and Argentina. Argentina was, they were still thinking about 1924. So there was like a real kind of like opportunity missed for them. They were the first ones that were kind of that brought up, should we be participating in the Olympics, at the 24 Olympics? But that never happened for whatever reason. So when they saw Uruguay, you'll see in my book, and just looking back at the archives now, the Argentine press, they really celebrated the victory of Uruguay. This was a victory of Rio Platense football, of the school of Rio Platense football, a victory for South America, and going into the race as well, the Latin race. It was all a big kind of celebration. But when Uruguay got back from that 24 Olympics, Argentina was like, okay, we need to show them that we should have been there. We had a series of friendlies towards the end of 1924 where that ended in a lot of violence and pitch invasions, and Argentina won one of the games as well, and they kind of declared themselves the moral champions of the world because they had won by default. The knock-on effect. So like Amsterdam was like Argentina's like it was there, like they had to kind of make this this moral victory like kind of tangible, and they had to go there. And they were extremely strong team as well. But Uruguay as well had because they had reunified, they had incorporated elements from Peñarol, but also a few more really important players that we see make a real impact on the game, the world game. So we have Hector Castro, the one-handed forward, a real kind of determined, it gets thrown around a lot, the Luis Suarez of the time or blah, 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 blah. But he really was that kind of rugged street football. He was really, his game was really honed in the Montevideo's lower leagues, where, a brawl happened every other game. There was a scrap. So it was a real scrappy kind of forward, and he was obviously really strong and like a deadly finisher as well. And we had another player who was of that kind of similar to that was Lorenzo Fernandez as well. So he's this kind of center half who kind of was the kind of representation of the kind of drifting away from this more Uruguayan beautiful game to a more kind of determined physical game, or kind of adding that aspect, because Uruguay never kind of left that improvising kind of style. So Lorenzo as well was a real fighter, and you'll see in the book that he gets into lots of mischief on the field and off the field. So with these new players, and obviously with the bulk of the 24 squad, Uruguay, yeah, they go on to defend their title in a lot of really tough games. So Europe had developed as well footballistically. Uruguay had to face the Dutch, the hosts in the first round. So the Dutch were the kind of in 24 they were Uruguay's strongest opponents. They were the
Mm.
ones that put up the resistance the most. But Uruguay just dispatched them
Blew,
quite easily.
blew them
It
away.
was, yeah, but it was the second game against Germany that really kind of was a turning point in both, yeah, the tournament for Uruguay, but the kind of mentality, or that this is like really serious, where you know this is the highest kind of stage. Like they might not have been the strongest team. That was probably Italy in the tournament, but Germany just belted the crap out of Uruguay that game. They didn't have anything in terms of football to respond with, so they just resorted to violence and brutality. And you'll see that the Uruguayan players, when they were interviewed, and the journalists after it, they were like, we've never seen a game like this. We can't believe this. And
Mm.
not to go into the stereotypes of Uruguayan football, but you'll see in my first book, and kind of violence and physical play was just a huge part of the kind of amateur game, which was born from this kind of like barrio, this kind of like street football mentality, where like everyone
Mm.
had to kind of like bite and scratch their way to win. So Uruguayans had seen their fair share of scraps, but this was something else. And for them to say, this is the most brutal game we've played, that says a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
it becomes more tactical bullying, doesn't it, in terms of the way that the style goes? And I think that, in a way, is a recognition and a respect for the style of football that the South American teams are playing, especially Uruguay. Is that there's probably in Amsterdam a admittance that technically we cannot compete with these teams. So in order for us to get either an advantage or to close the gap between our respective qualities, we're going to have to, as they say, engage in the dark arts, and that is, a lot of really horrible fouls and physicality, and regaining those margins through strength rather than through technique. And I think that becomes apparent to Uruguay as they go through the tournament, and I think they get smart to that quite quickly, don't they?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, yeah. So Uruguay kind of always had this like tactical, pragmatic kind of outlook anyway, the way they went into games in the 20s and even before. They kind of slowly, to get a feel of the opponent, because that was a kind of integral part to the Uruguayan school of football. The philosophy was kind of this intelligent game. Football was a game of chess. Like they always like
Mm.
to talk about how they felt the game differently to people who saw it merely as like a physical exercise. That's a kind of a paraphrasing one particular official in my book when he's in the United States. He's like, we feel the game differently. Like to the North Americans, they just play this as a sport, like something just to strengthen their bodies. But for us, it's like something
Mm.
different. So that kind of the Uruguayans, they fought back. If they were going to get hit, they hit back. But yeah, that kind of really kind of consolidated the importance of being intelligent as well. So that
Mm.
kind of reaffirmed the Uruguayan style as well, as that we're playing like an intelligent game um, based on combinations, playing football, maintaining our head as well, our composure. So that kind of, yeah, it gave them this kind of resolve as well. They that kind of hardened
Mm.
throughout the tournament. But it also, yeah, kind of this gave them a self confidence as well that they could do this playing their own game.
Yeah, and they obviously go on to as we've said, retain their championship, their trophy. They get that second star again, the world's leading football power. And then the interesting sort of like next part of the story is we get into the run up of 1930. There's this new tournament that they're going to be putting on called, the World Cup. It's its own FIFA ordained tournament that's going to invite countries from around the world to participate, in its inaugural version. And I think a lot of places are putting their hands up, but the interesting one that does put its hand up is Uruguay, and Uruguay going as a nominee for hosting this tournament and is then selected as the tournament. Now, is that because they are at the time, the world's leading football power? Is that the sort of respect that Uruguay has that FIFA go, well, of course we're going to go to the backyard of clearly where the best players in the world are, so let's, host it there? Or was there something a bit more logical or technical about the decision making in this hosting of the World Cup?
No, Uruguay, they had to do some work to win that, the candidacy, or to win the hosting rights rather. Um, and yeah, I wouldn't say they were chosen or like selected
Mm.
by FIFA. So they were voted in by the members. It was a vote by acclamation actually. So everything that kind of Jules Rimet wanted, his members kind of half rebelled against him. They were like, at the Congress, they said, we want Uruguay to host this, and he was kind of, his hands were tied. He's like, okay, this is not really part of the rules, but the show of hands, like who wants them?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was pretty much like that. But yeah, so that story came. It started in, oh, well, I mean, FIFA had always, they'd always dreamt of hosting a World Cup for, since their inception, really, in 1904. But yeah, in 1928, just before, on the eve of the Amsterdam Olympics, you had the FIFA Congress, and that's when they the members voted in for the creation or they voted the creation of a World Cup. And that was, yeah, so even from the start, the Uruguayan delegates at the time, they kind of looked at each other, and they knew then, we're going to go for this. And after the tournament had ended, articles already came up about Uruguay's candidacy. It's like, and even this kind of, not that it was their divine right, but it was, they had kind of, they had won the prestige. They have earned the right to be considered like a real host. And Uruguayan papers were kind of, they were saying as well, it's like a World Cup in Europe, like we're the world champions. Like, should
Yeah,
would
yeah.
we even, this is before the bidding even began, but they were like, should we even play in Europe? Like,
Yeah,
if we're not hosts, are we gonna play?
yeah, we're
Um,
doing all the travelling constantly, isn't it? It's about time that somebody comes
yeah,
to us. Is this
exactly.
sort of attitude, isn't it? And
Yeah.
did
So
they also leverage the 100 years since Uruguay's constitution was made as well, or the story is there to sort of like make it a celebration of Uruguay, isn't it?
yeah. So the project for the candidacy came about in early 1929, so January 1929. There was a couple of Nacional. So Nacional have a huge importance to Uruguay's football story, but also the creation of the World Cup. You have a couple of officials, Usera Bermudez and another one, Espil. So they drafted this project of Uruguay or Montevideo hosting the first World Cup. So that arrived in the association maybe March of that year, and the Congress was coming up to vote in May in Barcelona. So it was a real kind of quick campaign that they had to kind of forge. So they got the backing of the state. So these were the things. So it was a sporting prestige. So Uruguay had won. They're the defending world champions.
Hmm.
Sporting prestige had been achieved in Paris, in Amsterdam, and in America as well. So for the Copas America and all that. The centenary celebration. So as you alluded to, Uruguay was entering, or they're already in the centenary. So in 1925, they had the centenary of the Declaration of Independence. 28, the creation of the state. And 1930 would be the centenary of Uruguay's first constitution.
Yeah.
So that was a real kind of, this is, a national kind of celebration. Like the symbolism of that was used to kind of convince fellow South American countries as well to support Uruguay's bid. But the one that got Uruguay over the line was the financing of the tournament. So backed by the Uruguayan government, they promised to pay for everything. pay for all the passage, accommodation, allowances, um, the construction of a national stadium as well, the
Mm.
Centenario. So it was a real, it was a victory of diplomacy as well. So Uruguay were coming up against other bids from from Italy, from the Netherlands, from a lot of European countries, different financial models as well. So the Italians, they kind of promoted like it was like a commercial kind of profit finance model, but Uruguay proposed something different where, after all costs had been covered,
Mm.
the earnings will be distributed amongst member nations and FIFA get the rest, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the one that tipped it over was that Uruguay would pay for everything. So they did a bit of lobbying. They, you'll read it in the book. They made it happen. They got their South American bloc to kind of torpedo, rival bids or rival financial bids.
Mm.
The United States as well, which was looking to get close to Uruguay diplomatically. Their association supported the bid, supported their financial bid. And yeah, it came to the end. It was a series of speeches from the Argentine delegate, who proposed Uruguay. And then from there, the Europeans saw that they're kind of, they saw what was happening. So Italy
Yeah.
withdrew, Spain withdrew, all the countries withdrew. And then the Chilean delegate, he was the one that called for the candidacy of Uruguay. So he called for this kind of vote of acclamation, and that's when the FIFA president was like, "I don't know if this is a good idea," but everyone was like, "We don't care." Like
We want to do it anyway.
Uruguay. That's
Oh,
pretty much it.
and I think you, like you say, it's absolutely spot on in terms of the it truly does make it a World Cup that way as well, isn't it? Like say, the world is Europe centric at the time. The center of the universe is obviously described, often the case as Britain and France. So to have this in a nation, South America, truly does make it a World Cup, and you get all these countries heading there. I think there's about 13 who participate, isn't it, in the first one, all happening in one city as well, which I think when you come to compare it to the World Cup we're about to see, which is spread across three nations in about 15 or 16 different cities, it fathoms belief that they used to have to put a World Cup on in just one host city.
Yeah.
But again, we act surprised at this point that, oh well, Uruguay are hosting it, and then Uruguay are successful in the tournament as well. But they were the favourites going into the tournament, weren't they? That not only are they on home soil, but they've also got, after 1928, the best squad of players. There was only going to be one result, really, wasn't there?
I mean, in hindsight, maybe. Going into the tournament, though, it was really between like Uruguay and Argentina. So the kind of, yeah, I mean, this is the eternal rivalry. Everything was kind of like a coin toss between the two. When it mattered, though, like when it kind of counted in finals or deciders, Uruguay tended to overcome them. But leading into the tournament, Argentina had already reunified as well, so their squad was extremely strong. They'd reunified before the Amsterdam games, I'm pretty sure as well. And Uruguay's preparation. So this is a kind of this is something that's a constant in Uruguayan history. Is that Uruguayan football history is that the kind of lead up to the tournaments are just filled with kind of this just controversy, like uncertainty, real pessimism as well. We say that Uruguay was kind of the optimistic kind of nation and the football, this optimistic football nation. But if you go a bit deeper, like before the tournament, you see it today, there's always this kind of sense of dread that something bad's kind of going to happen. And Uruguay's lead up to that, to the World Cup was the same. Like in months before, Argentina or Buenos Aires had hosted the Copa America and Argentina had beaten them. So Argentina was seen as like the real kind of threat. It was at Uruguay's home, and it was like, we must win this. There probably wasn't a question, whether they'll win it or not, because like they couldn't kind of put that in their minds. But it was neck and neck
Yeah.
between Uruguay and Argentina. Mm.
No, and I think, like you say, it is always that fear. I think with any home nation is that it's often seen one way, isn't it? Where oh, you're on home soil, so therefore you'll be the most comfortable. But there's also a weight of expectation as well, wasn't there? But I think from a Uruguay perspective, with this being the inaugural tournament, with this being something that is brand spanking new, that they had their ability to enjoy it as well, and really sort of like have this football festival, wasn't it? It was a real celebration of football, and Uruguay, really took it to its heart, didn't it? And I think, like you alluded to earlier, football at that time was a real part of the Uruguayan identity, and this was, one might say, a a look at how much that becomes part of society in Uruguay, and with having football there, the home of football, essentially.
100%. Like football was part of of Uruguayan society. Like it was so kind of deeply entrenched, and it was such a national expression as well. Where so when the World Cup came, it was like this is confirmation. This is confirmation of um, where we've come from. It is a culmination of this kind of decades long journey of this adoption and nationalization, popularization, democratization. And now this is just a pure national celebration. So it went
Mm,
beyond the kind of, you had the centenary celebrations, but really it was a celebration of the game and how it had really kind of taken a grip on the kind of the national soul. Um, so yeah, it was a pure celebration. So Montevideo just brought everyone in. Like the tournament
mm,
happened, there was stadium delays with the Estadio Centenario, this purpose built stadium, this kind of concrete, this big coliseum. It was something unseen at the
mm,
time. Or Jules Rimet says it was other stadiums are kind of weren't purpose built for football, and this one was kind of like the first um, kind of massive stadium for that. Well, that's what they were saying.
mm.
So yeah, that all came to a head on the 18th of July. So on the centenary of the Constitution, they had the stadium inauguration as well, and it was a pure celebration. But as you'll see in the book, the reality was a little bit different. Like Uruguay played their debut game against Peru after that opening ceremony at the Centenario. And whether it was the pitch or whether it was nerves or whether it was, something else, they played horribly.
Mm.
At halftime, they were whistled off the pitch. So that shows how, you know, where they kind of started to where they came from. But yeah, the Centenario
Mm.
wasn't even uh, the stage of the opening games of the tournament. So the construction delays had kind of meant that the tournament had started improvised as it was. So the game actually started at two simultaneous games on the opening day at the Gran Parque Central, the home of Nacional, and at the Estadio Positos, which was the home of Peñarol.
Mm.
Uh, so you have these opening games there, and that's where the first World Cup goal was scored at
Yeah.
Positos by the Frenchman Laurent.
Yeah.
So that kind of that kind of showed there the culmination of this, and the celebration of Montevideo is like, and it was really fitting that it was hosted in the Parque Central and Positos at the start. It was like this global game, or this global celebration of the game was kind of played in the neighborhood
Mm.
grounds, grounds that kind of were there before there was any huge crowds. Well, not Positos, but the Gran Parque Central. So it really kind of was a nicely kind of tied up little thing.
Yeah, no, I'm really enjoying it because I think as well, if I remember rightly, Montevideo's got is it the highest concentration of football grounds in a city? I think anywhere in the world. I think maybe Buenos Aires possibly has got maybe a challenge to that, but I think Montevideo is sort of like just it's a football factory, really, isn't it? You can't turn a corner without bumping into a football stadium. So to have it there at that time, it's got that structure, it's got that infrastructure about it already. And when you get to obviously this showpiece in the final in this purpose-built stadium, Uruguay, they come up against, what we would refer to as the old enemy. They're playing Argentina, and it's the showpiece final that everybody wanted for this first World Cup as well, wasn't it? And
Mm.
it wasn't going necessarily Uruguay's way, was it, to begin with? There was some chaos around, the use of which ball they want to use. They were trailing at half time and things like that. It wasn't going to look like it was going to end the story that we know it now. But then you get this magical moment in the second half, don't you, where Uruguay basically they everything starts to click for them, doesn't it?
Yeah, so Uruguay and Argentina. So this was just the final of finals. It was the game that everyone really wanted and expected, and it just happened to happen like that. The lead up was just crazy for the game. I mean, you had 15, 20,000 Argentines crossing the river. Um, we were used to seeing Argentines crossing, on the overnight ferries to Uruguay in maybe their thousands, but this was just something else. It was a true kind of invasion
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
capital. These days, how many kind of away tickets get allocated now? A few thousand or something. So this was really the lead up was just intense with the kind of ticket demands in Montevideo, just chaos around ticket offices and just police involved and just like all this kind of like crowd crushes and everything. You'll see it you read it in the book. But yeah, the game kind of started, with this ball dispute. It was kind of typical of this is something else that kind of really, um, makes us, appreciate the kind of first World Cup as well. That it was so real. It was like it kind of represented this barrio football as well. It was like which this team wants to play with their ball, the other team wants to play with theirs. So Argentina had their ball, which was I think it was an English kind of made. It was like a larger ball, and Uruguay had their ball, which was smaller, heavier. They said it was a Scottish made ball or something like that. So there was a
sounds about
dispute
right.
whether yeah. So there was a dispute about which one they would play with, and the solution, they say, this is not all grounded in complete accuracy, but who cares about that really? In terms of this, I don't, because it's a great story. So the Belgian referee, with a coin that he picked up from a doorman, flipped the coin. Argentina won it, and they chose their ball for the first half. And then Uruguay could obviously choose what direction they wanted to start the game and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it started. It started pretty crazy. The first half, Argentina were up at half time.
Mm.
Their second goal by Stabile was highly disputed. They say it might have been offside, so it was a long ball to him. He kind of beat he loved being on the last man and kind of
Yeah, yeah,
beating that trap. So Nasazzi, the ball had gone over Nasazzi, and he'd put his hand up, and they just waved it away, gave the goal. At halftime, they say Nasazzi went to the referee's dressing room to have a bit of a chat with him. Not a threatening chat, they say, but he was pleading with them. He wanted to converse with
yeah,
them,
yeah,
and the kind of the story is that the Centenario, the walls were still kind of wet. The cement walls were still wet. So he saw a nail on the floor, and he kind of drew a diagram of the play. To convince this ref, like, what have you done? Like, as if like that would, he would reverse the call or something. They say that the ref, had said, you've got a point there. Like, I was probably wrong.
mm,
But anyway, it
yeah,
was that, and the nerves in Argentina as well, the Argentine camp. So that was part of the lead up as well. There's well documented kind of lead up in terms of these death threats that came to Argentina, the Argentine camp. This nerves. Some of the players, Louis Monti, their centre half was, he didn't want to play. Like right into the last minute, he didn't want to play.
mm,
At half time, they didn't want to. Some didn't want to continue because they thought, geez, if we're winning now, if we end up winning this whole thing, like how are we going to get out of here? That's what
yeah,
they
yeah.
say. And then things happened in the Uruguay dressing room, and they came out and they played with Uruguay's ball, and the rest is history.
Yeah, no, well, like I say, it's those margins, isn't it? Maybe that second half with their own ball is history's way of telling us that it was meant to be. And like you say, it's a crowning achievement of a decade of brilliance from Uruguay as well, and to win it on home soil as well must have been, one of the most proudest moments in the nation's history too. And obviously beating Argentina is just a bonus on the back of that. And essentially, this is where the book sort of reaches its crescendo, doesn't it? From that perspective, we get this story, and we get this obviously celebration of Uruguay, and it doesn't end there. I know there'll probably be possibly a third book, Martin, if we're maybe looking ahead of time here. But there's obviously still so much to learn about Uruguay as a football nation. Between then and obviously the present day. One thing I did want to ask you before we end is I heard you mention it a couple of times beforehand. It was this the River Plate style, and you obviously so eloquently said it in actual Spanish, and my Spanish is very very poor, so I won't try and replicate it. But it was interesting that Uruguay sort of had based their system and their style of football on this. But obviously, River Plate, I'm making the assumption that comes from the Argentine club based in Buenos Aires. So, was that just like a transfer across from the neighbouring nation? Was that someone who brought that to Uruguay, or is it a wider umbrella term for just South American football?
No, it's a wider term for the Rio Platense region. So Uruguay and Argentina are kind of
Ah,
they're
I see,
bordered
I
by
see.
the River Plate. So yeah, so Rio Platense means um, Argentina and Uruguay, or Buenos Aires and Montevideo. So that kind of Rio Platense style, we call it like the criollo style, this homegrown way of playing. So this was forged. This was like a strong part of both Uruguay and Argentina's adoption of the game. So um, part of this national adoption and um, you know, well, kind of taking it from the British was, we need to nationalize the game. We need to create, we need to create our own teams with our own homegrown players and with our own style. So the style was kind of used like an oppositional style, distinct way of playing that could, set them apart from the ones that came before them, the foreign element.
Mm,
So this kind of short passing, we have the classic, short passing style, improvisation. It's a style of play that was kind of honed in the vacant lots of Buenos Aires and the potreros in Buenos Aires and Montevideo, or the campitos in Montevideo as well. So you had that kind of Rio Platense style, which was against the kind of British old style of physical game, not as technical, I guess. But within Uruguay itself, they kind of forged this. They had to forge this distinctive identity as well, in opposition to Argentina.
mm,
So this is kind of linked with the nationalization of the game um, was really tightly linked to Uruguayan nationhood itself, and
yeah.
national identity itself. So Uruguay, as a country, it needed to forge this unique identity because it was getting swallowed up by its giant neighbors. So it was like the only way that we can kind of survive these overbearing countries that are always threatening our borders, in the 19th century. The only way we could kind of get above this is to create really strong, educated citizens, intelligent citizens. Now, this was all wrapped up in kind of, racialized terms. At the time, scientific racism and everything was really apparent, and Uruguayans and Argentines and Brazilian kind of nation builders, they look to European, white kind of cultural expressions, or education reforms, or immigration or something. So
Mm,
football was a way of expressing them as different. But with Uruguay, yeah, they had to create something distinctive to Argentina as well. And you mentioned as well how you're so enamored by Scottish football. So
yeah.
it was Uruguay's kind of style they were developing similar to Argentina, but what brought Uruguay kind of ahead of everyone, what made them a kind of leader in South America in the 1910s, was the arrival of a Scottish railway worker, John Harley, a
Mm.
draftsman who came in to work in Montevideo he worked in Peñarol for the Central Uruguay Railways. So
Yeah.
he was a centre half. In the old, so by centre half, I mean a central midfielder in
Mm.
that, that 2-3-5 formation. So he came to Montevideo and he introduced this kind of new way of playing this Scottish style short passing game that was really based on the collective, on combination play, on intelligence of not just kind of booting the ball ahead. And this kind of created this really distinctive style of play. It was helped by a new type of centre forward that was
Mm.
created in Uruguay, but also had its parallels in Europe in the Danubian school. So the kind of withdrawn centre forward, so someone that would kind of sit back or kind of would track back and combine with the centre half and kind of create play in a kind of
Mm.
fan formation, the front five, and use the wingers and just lots of combinations and stuff. So that's how Uruguay really kind of got ahead of the game in South America, and it was that really came to its peak in the 1912 national team, which was seen, even in the 1920s, they were saying, 1912 was the year, was our best year. Like that was our best team, and that kind of legacy, that kind of lived on in the 1920s. Uruguay's kind of basis of combination play. So it all kind of wrapped up nicely that this was all a big celebration of where Uruguay had come from. It was a kind of vindication of their journey and their choices in footballing terms, but it was just a big celebration for the nation, like this kind of national euphoria, this kind of sense of
Mm.
belonging. This, the game had been seen as something that, could you really unite this kind of real immigrant working class mass behind, the idea of a nation, and La Celeste really epitomized that, and they symbolized, brought together a country as well. But yeah, you were saying the next book anyway, or maybe after 1930. Yeah, we've got lots to write about in Uruguay. So this
Yeah.
was the peak. Like, where do you go from here? I mean,
Now
world
this
champions, 3-time world champions. I mean, we know what happens after this, but I think there's a story in that, and you'll see in if you pick up my first book, From Beauty to Duty. Uruguay is obviously the sequel to that, but you see these constant themes running through it.
mm.
So it just shows it's just a continuation of this kind of footballing journey, with new actors. Some actors, continue through. This generation has to pass on to the next generation. They become coaches, etc.
Mm.
So watch this space.
Yeah, definitely. As long as we get to a point where there's a Diego Forlan book, I'm on board for that, Martin, because I'm a massive lover of all things Diego Forlan, as you could possibly imagine.
Yeah,
In terms of
maybe. Yeah, I don't know if I'll get that modern. Not really my thing. I like to access the
keep it,
things other
keep,
people can't really access. But Forlan's he's got a lot of heritage. His grandfather and father were involved in the game. So I think
oh, there we go.
around the 1950s we get his grandfather getting in on it.
The lineage of Forlan, it's already writing itself, you see. But in terms of this book, Martin, obviously coming out very, very soon.
Yep.
We're obviously based in the UK for this podcast, but we have listeners worldwide. So where will we be able to find your book moving forward?
So you can find this book on all the standard online retailers. So I mean, well, yeah, Waterstones in UK, but Amazon and all the other international retailers. It's in hardback and ebook versions. I've got a Substack as well, Uruguay football's first global power, which will have links on it as well for everyone. I'm just going to do a huge list of countries where you can buy the book. So yeah, it should be widely available. Just check me out.
Yeah, we'll definitely give that a share. We're on Substack as well, so we'll make sure to share it there. And as amongst all of our other social media pages as well. Martin, thank you so much for joining us, especially for getting up so early to talk to me as well. It's much appreciated. Obviously, the World Cup happening right now. Are you backing Uruguay for the trophy? Do you think they can go all the way?
No.
I like
No,
your
I
honesty, to
mean,
be fair.
I think I've just, yeah. So it's just the standard kind of pessimism. This kind of
Mm,
Uruguayan. I don't know if it's like um, humility or something like that. We kind of want to keep our uh, expectations low. Uh, Under Bielsa, it's been a bit rocky the last couple of years, really.
mm,
But when it comes to tournament time, this kind of this hope, the anticipation kind of rises as well. So we're recording just a few days before the start, and Uruguay actually had their send off. Usually, you have your send off friendlies, but on this occasion, Uruguay didn't organize any friendlies to kind of see the team off. People were just like, this is a bit strange, but I mean, just like Argentina, Uruguay had played kind of weaker opposition anyway in the lead up to the
yeah,
World Cup, so it was just a kind of celebration to be close to the people. But instead, they actually went out to the interior and they just had a kind of presentation to the people, and there are videos online as well of the players kind of playing with kids and getting photos and that. So that kind of, it warmed the heart and it kind of brought that hope, a flicker of hope back as well. So like, I'm getting into the World Cup spirit right now. Apart from obviously the tournament where it's happening and what's happening in the United States as well. It shouldn't even be happening in the United States. So within all the dreariness and the shocking stuff that's happening and the shocking people that are running the game, hopefully we can enjoy some football and the people can get some enjoyment. Uruguay, but all the other countries as well, and hopefully someone from South America can win it. I mean, apart
yeah.
from Argentina, maybe, but
Just, like I say, they've won it recently anyway, so it's fine. I'm very much on
if,
board
if they went,
Scotland.
yeah, if they went two in a row, yeah, then I want to. But yeah,
I,
Scotland, yeah. So
I
hopefully,
think
hopefully we
I
have
think Scotland will do it.
100%.
But definitely. But
The
and,
Scottish
and
fruit
like I
is
say, hopefully we can get past this World Cup with all its madness and the over commercialization and the stupid ticket sales, and obviously where it's being held, and then obviously we get to look forward to an opening game of the 2030 World Cup in Uruguay. In 4 years' time, which I think would be a much better thing, and I'd love to speak to you again about that, Martin. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure.
no worries, Nick. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And to you guys at home, once again, enjoy your summers. We'll be back with Series 3 in August. But for now, we'll catch you then. Have the way go.